Live from the Washington, D.C. area, all empowered citizens need to know about intelligent use of resources, smart governance, inclusive communities, smart industry, and healthy, thriving urbanization. This is Smart Sustainability, the TV talk about shaping a sustainable future in the digital age with Nicolette DeVidar. The last Sunday of 2020. Congratulations, we've made it almost through 2020. What a year this has been. Taking all of us into territory we've never set foot on before, and it likely won't stop here if you think about it. It rather feels like we all just arrived at a new shore with lots of unknown terrain to explore ahead of us. One of the things that are on many people's minds right now is finances. So the question comes up, how fair is our financial system? And is it time to perhaps question its validity? Good evening, I'm Nicolette DeVidar. We've known a monetary system for hundreds and hundreds of years. Not always, but it's been around for a while. Could we even imagine a different way? No worries, we're not talking socialism or the like. But as we grow as human beings, become more conscious, and most of us have during the last year, we found out more about the truth of assumptions and the flaws in some of our own thinking. We're also finding ourselves more and more in a place where we question why we do things the way we do. Have you not asked yourself the why question many times during last year? And just because something has been done in a certain way for a long time doesn't mean necessarily it works going forward. So with millions of businesses likely being wiped out, a debt overload beyond overload, and the World Economic Forum already talking about the Great Reset, is it time to take a closer look at our financial system, particularly in connection with the human spirit? Why do we have money? Do we need it? Or can we just not imagine a world without money because we've all been conditioned to think there's no alternative? And if there could be a world without money, and we're not talking cashless society here, but a non-monetary world, what would it or could it solve? Would it solve any of our problems? Utopic, you think? That's what we want to talk about tonight. Our guest is taking our minds to a place most of us have never been to, a different concept of how we create and exchange value and more equity through what he calls time capitalism. He's the author of The Capitalist's Worst Nightmare Come True, The Crucifixion of Capital, which launches today on Amazon. I'm pleased to have him join us right now to discuss with us his idea of time equity and how it works, or would work. Welcome, Richard Kunicki. And he's joining us via Zoom from Toronto.
Good evening, Nicolette. It's a real pleasure to see you again.
Good evening, Richard. I'm going to go right to it. So, The Capital's Worst Nightmare, Crucifixion of Capital, that's a very ominous title. But it's not about socialism, communism, or anything like that. In fact, there is more of a spiritual component to it. But why that title?
Well, I think that we're all usually told that a catchy title or a catchy elevator speech or something of that nature is the thing that most people want. They say that within 15 seconds, people have made up their mind whether they want to look at a book or whether they want to watch a video, or they've oftentimes made up their mind about who's standing in front of them in less than 5 seconds, just by, if you will, judging a book by its cover.
But you actually also told me, I think you started writing it over Easter?
Well, actually, the book was started in October 18th, 2008, when the last major the global financial crisis hit. I was reading the newspaper that morning at home and having a cup of coffee, enjoying the business section, when the title or the first page caught me, and it was that they were looking for a new world economic order. And I don't know why, but my mind automatically, after I read that newspaper article, I recognized and knew somehow intrinsically that the person that was going to write a new world economic order was going to be me. And for the first time in 50 years, my life made sense from the standpoint of all the different things that I did to get to here at this point in time.
Yeah, I found this really interesting because you talk about the crucifixion. So to me, crucifixion and ascension are very closely linked, right?
Absolutely.
And the interesting part is also when we think about money, I think most of us have never really thought about this. When you look at the function of money, the word credit, it really means it comes from credo, I believe. That's what it's based on. So it almost is a reflection of the spiritual component.
I would like to believe that in some cases that there was some integrity when the system was initially put together, but I really question it today.
Yeah. So how do people react? I mean, you launched today. I'm sure you marketed out already earlier to some people. What was the general reaction? How do they react even to the idea of the crucifixion of capital?
Well, ironically, we decided that we were going to put the book out into the world on Easter Sunday, which of course is not the crucifixion, it's the resurrection.
Yeah.
And the book title really is not about any kind of a crucifixion. It's actually about the resurrection of humanity and humanity without a monetary system, because I personally don't believe that it was God's intent or the universe's intent for us to come here and compare ourselves to all sorts of other people with regards to how much money we make or how much money we keep.
So let's talk about this. Do you really think that taking the monetary system out, and we're going to get to how you were proposing what we could do it with, but do you think this is going to solve our problems?
I don't know if there's a solution for every problem or a problem for every solution at times. But I will say this. My career as a financial advisor started in 1981, and I can honestly tell you that I have listened to more stories from clients and potential clients over the last almost 40 years. And all I continue to hear about is the anxieties that are associated with money. Will I be able to pay off my mortgage? Will I be able to save enough money for a down payment? Will I be able to save for retirement? Will I be able to put my children through school? Will I be able to sustain any kind of a long-term or medium-term injury preventing me to go back and forth to work? So the total amount of anxiety on a day-to-day basis and breathed upon by 7 billion people does, in my opinion, create a tremendous amount of anxiety with regards to the whole financial system.
But isn't that just a replacement of other types of anxiety that people may have had earlier? So I'm sure when we didn't have the refrigerator yet and we couldn't conserve all the money and the foods yet, people were anxious about what are they going to have to eat tomorrow, or what are they going to have to eat in winter, or what are they going to have to... So have we not just replaced one anxiety with another through the system?
Well, and that's a great question, Nicolette. I think that everything, as you sort of mentioned and alludes to the fact that we adapt. So we try and adapt to all of these different strategies and systems. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a little tougher to get mangoes in the middle of January if you look back 50 or 100 years ago. Whereas today, with transportation and increased ability to move things around, we can find ourselves very comfortably eating and sharing things that otherwise weren't growing in our climate. So I kind of think the same way in the context of money. If we all have the same anxieties about paying for school, if you look at the buzzwords these days of what people are truly interested in, they're talking about great ideas, and there's all sorts of countries now that are starting to look at, if you will, some great ideas that don't cost anything anymore. And for example, I'll go to education quickly. There's a lot of countries in our world today that the students are not required to pay for secondary or post-secondary education. And that, I think, even just by itself, for students, with the amount of student loans increasing, and the fact that many students who take out student loans don't end up working in the same career path that they originally thought. Sometimes there's huge letdown with regards to the amount of money that I'm making and the amount of debt that I incurred to get to where I thought I was going to go.
Now, I will tell you, so when I asked our crew members also today when I came in here, and I said, can you imagine a world without money? So this is what I heard. I heard impossible, because most people think about, no, it's not possible. And I heard other people, they actually had to think about this. So the question is really, when somebody comes up to you at home and says, can you even imagine a world without money? What's your instinctive reaction to that? I bet most of us would say, I haven't even thought about, or how is this supposed to work, or what can we do with that? So it's really interesting. And in this book, I'm going to show you a book here in the camera for a second. This is the book. I have it. I read it. You have a lot of really nice quotes in there as well, Richard. And one of them I actually want to grab here for a second, which was from JFK, who said, problems cannot be solved by cynics and skepticisms whose minds are limited by obvious realities. So let's talk about obvious realities in relation or in the context of our current financial system.
Well, I would absolutely love to perhaps inspire you in some small way with regards to the answer to your question. So maybe I'll put it like this. I know everybody has, or most people have, a bucket list. And one of the things that I have on my bucket list, in fact, it's about the only thing I have on my bucket list, is to do a round the world flight, okay, in either Branson's Virgin Galactic or Musk's Trans Global, whatever it is. But it would be an absolute trip to fly around the world. And two things. Number one, that would be an extremely expensive trip. But on the other side of it, it would also verify, for me anyway, that the world is truly round instead of being flat. And as we're aware of the fact today that there are still a number of people who are, thinking about the fact that the world still is flat. So despite all the evidence, I don't know what to tell you, but I don't think that when I go around the world, I got a funny feeling I'm not going to see something flat when I'm in outer space.
Yeah, which means we all need to have an open mind. I wanted to talk about what all of this book has to do with the human spirit. You speak about the resurrection of the human spirit. How is that connected to the financial system?
Well, I think that the human spirit, in essence, oftentimes is this reality that we've been led to believe that through materialism and consumerism, having all the latest gadgetry and having all sorts of money are the things that really give us a true intent of happiness. And the truth about that, very simply, is that those things are all extraneous motivators. They're all very extraneous things. They're not within ourselves. They're not within our heart. And I think at the end of the day, there's so many people out there that have proven many times over that regardless of the amount of money that they make, it's not necessarily a tool for happiness. So if we're taking a look at a tool for happiness and we're talking about all the things that we can buy and own, does that really truly make us that happy at the end of the day? I don't know if it's something that's shifted and changed since I've started to write the book, but one of the most troubling quotations that comes to my mind that is in the book is about, I think it was Gandhi, and he said something along the lines of, be the change that you want to see in the world. And that has been a real conflict for me, because it's very difficult when you are working in a cash or financial society and you still want to have the mentality and, if you will, the actions of not having a monetary system in place. So it's a huge amount of questions, and it's a huge amount of how do you actually bring this idea and move it forward so that it becomes fully acceptable, but acceptable based on the right reasons. So I'd like to just stop for a quick second and shift a little bit. And the simple reality is that money has a huge following in the context of greed. There's a lot of people who are really greedy. They've got to have more money. And then more money, in some cases, we can look at politicians and we can take a look at priests. We might say that there's an essence of corruption inside these organizations with regards to the amount of money. In fact, Lawrence Lessig and Chomsky talk about the fact that democracy and capitalism are almost impossible to coexist, and I agree.
Why?
Sorry, why?
Yeah.
Well, simply as an example, if one follows through, and bear with me, I'm not an American, but I don't think our political systems are that much different. But there's a ton of lobbying done for positions in politics. And if you listen to Lawrence Lessig on a TED Talk that he did a while back, you will recognize very quickly, or at least I did, that most of us who actually make the effort to go out and vote because we feel that that's our democratic right and we want to exert our vote, we're not actually being recorded as a valid vote. And a large part of that has to do with the lobbyists who manage to buy candidates into the realm of politics without really giving any thought to the truth of the matter and who do we really want to have in various positions around the country. And I think that collectively leads to a tremendous amount of apathy. And I think the number of voters that show up, or the voter turnout, is probably lower than it has been in the last, let's say, 50 to 100 years. I think voter turnout back in the day of, let's say, JFK was significantly more. I think people were a lot more into the vote. I think there was a lot more fairness with regards to it. And I think today a lot of people are very skeptical about how the entire voting system works and the electoral process works.
We're certainly after this last election. That's probably very true. There is no question. Now, you know the saying, there's a lot of people who say money makes the world go round, which, yeah, as you just said, that's probably true. But let me ask you, at the end of the day, money is energy. So we could replace money with, I don't know, kitchen knives or whatsoever. It's energy, right? It is the intent that goes into the money that either makes it good or bad or gives it meaning, is it not? So are we condemning money for money, or are we taking it to a completely different level, or are you taking it to a completely different level with a different approach? What are the main issues you are trying to address with a different equity system?
Okay, so simply put, today there's a huge conversation going on about income inequality. Mm-hmm. Why can't we talk about income equality? And yes, there's a lot of people who are going to scoff at equality, in the sense that even though our democratic process and in many other documentations, for example, written in the Bible, that we are all made equal. And if that's the case, then why would somebody's bank account make somebody more equal than somebody else? So I think when we look at some of the questions that are truly needing to be asked, then as an example, we can actually take a look and see that it's really, again, it's humanity and the ego which makes someone feel superior to another individual who perhaps may be just as bright but never had an opportunity to go to school and to pay for a great education. And because it's so difficult to try and figure out all the questions, let alone all the answers, and to what degree do you take them? And I totally understand where, in essence, some people are going to be upset about my statements, but I use as an example in the book, And it's a very short example, but the example is very similar in that a doctor or a surgeon has got to go to school for a long time to be able to do what he does as a profession. And yet, at the same point in time, if you look at the way a hospital works, a hospital will go out and attract the best physicians by giving them the most monetary reward and the most, if you will, reasons to come to their hospital, to come and work or to be a part of that. The sad part is that we don't recognize the people who clean the operating theaters as an example. And from a hospital perspective, that's an expense that we want to have in the sense of a small expense in comparison to what these people do, because they didn't do 10 years or 15 years in school to become absolutely superior in the knowledge of how to clean. And yet, coronavirus is an absolutely fantastic foundation for people to look at this and say, wait a minute, the people who are now going to be cleaning our hospital theaters and our hospital waiting rooms, these people are going to have to be far more sophisticated in what they do and the training and the education, so that they're being able to eradicate disease and germs completely. And we both know that without a clean operating theater and without a surgeon who knows what he's doing, the individual that is on the operating table just may be at stake from the standpoint of their lives. So at one level, we can ask, well, whose life is more important? Is it the doctor, is it the surgeon, or is it the person who cleaned the operating room when it comes to the most important person, who happens to be the patient?
Yeah, many people, I think, would probably agree with you. I know there has been a lot of discussion about this also in terms of janitors, for example. Like, if you look at organizations, why should a CEO get, a multiple amount of a janitor? When you look at this and people say, yeah, because he's doing the thinking work and the others are doing the cleaning work. But at the end of the day, what keeps a building actually standing? So the janitor probably does an equal amount of work that is just as valuable as someone else. I'm not sure we're ready in this world yet for this discussion, but certainly with what COVID did to all of us, I think people are more and more realizing that we're moving away from the consumerism. We are realizing that we no longer have a need outside of us for a lot of the things. So you look more internally, and you start changing your thought habits. Now, in your book, you mentioned a quote that says, you are the sum of your thoughts. I've heard that before too. So you are the sum of your thoughts, and therefore every decision you ever made has brought you to exactly where you sit right now. So when you think about this, if that's the case, and you're kind of, you basically, your output is what you create, that's your own responsibility, right? But how would a non-monetary system change that?
Well, the way that I describe it in my book might give you a little bit of clarity, Nicolette. I suggest in my book that we take a look at the possibility of thinking that you were born into a world of time equity in the very first place. So here we've had, let's say, 2,000 years of a non-financial system. And because of a non-financial system, we've had to be, let's just say, a little bit more responsible in the things that we do in our planet. So companies would have to clean up their mess. There'd be all sorts of other, let's just say, implications, because time is relatively, it's unmanipulating. You can't really manipulate time. And subsequently, when I'm sitting back and I'm looking at these things from the standpoint of, if we had been born into the system of time equity and everything was available and people were enjoying their lives doing what they wanted to do, and then some guy walks in and says, hey, guess what? We're going to create this thing called the bank, and at the bank, they're going to be able to take this thing called money, and we're going to make that the challenge and the success of our lives. so that you can have this stuff that, people tell us that money doesn't grow on trees. And, we figured out that actually it really does, because money was paper up until recently, and hence it does grow on trees. But the simple reality is this: if somebody came in and offered us, that had been surviving and being extremely sophisticated with our time as a monitoring system for what we do, and then they came in and they offered us a monetary system, I don't think anybody would take it.
Let's go back here for a second. So I know you mentioned the time equity, and I want to get back to that, but you also mentioned before that money doesn't grow on trees. And you do go through great lengths in your book also in talking about how banks work and explaining that to people. So we actually have a graphic, which I was hoping you can walk us through here and show us how banks work, so that we can then build on it and move over to the time equity. So let's see, can we show the graphic on the screen here for a second? All right, here it is. Richard, can you walk us through that?
Okay, so very, very simply, an individual has $100 that they want to put away for 1 year, as an example. And at the same time, they have a concern that they get back their deposit, their $100, and subsequently they want to be able to at least make some kind of rate of return on that money. So your friendly banker agrees with you and says, yes, you can deposit $100, and we're going to be very happy to pay you 1% on that money. So 1 year later, you will get your $100 back plus 1%. Now, most people don't understand how the bank guarantees the original deposit, but it's very simple, because the bank does its due diligence and they find creditworthy people and people who have a total debt service ratio of less than 40% and all of the different calculations, and they will lend somebody the money at 4%. So hence, we have a question in the sense that if the bank made 4% and they paid you 1%, what did they make? And the conventional wisdom states that the bank made 3%, when in effect, the bank actually made 300%. So let's understand that the bankers collected $104, they paid $1 out, and they retained $3. So what they paid you was $1, and they earned $3 after they paid you back. So that's a 300% return. And when people start to look at that as a reality as to how simply the bank works, and then I explain as an example that fractional banking requires 10% of the deposit, that means the bankers can continue to lend that money out, albeit at 90% levels, and go a multiple number of depths, okay, to secure that same rate of return on that same net money that comes in. So in technicality, they're making a lot more than the 300% that it really looks like. So here's the funny part, because if everybody figured this out, and my job as a financial advisor has been to make sure that people understand the investments that they make. And if everybody understood from a financial literacy perspective that this is how a bank makes money, I'm pretty sure that most people would line up, okay, on the side of buying bank shares instead of putting their money on deposit for the banks to make a profit. And if everybody became shareholders of the bank, there might not be any money or enough money left on deposit for the bankers to make a profit. And in effect, the system actually kind of falls apart at that level. That's what they don't want you to know.
So is this what you call the lie in your book?
I think it's a lie. I think it's perpetrated by the institutions, by the financial institutions. And I think it's even gone beyond a lie, whereby cognitive dissonance doesn't actually allow the majority of people to understand the truth about the things that they're doing.
Hang on, let's talk about cognitive dissonance. Elaborate what you mean by that.
And bear with me, cognitive dissonance is a very complex term, but in a simple perspective, it simply means that if we are doing something and we come to the truth where all of a sudden we realize what we're doing is not right. It's not the truth. The reality is that most of us will keep on doing the same thing regardless of the fact, because it's just something that they've been, if you will, doing it for their entire lives, or as you mentioned earlier, the financial system's been operating for more than 2,000 years probably. So when we have that into consideration, it's very hard for most people to look at something different, much the same as if we started off with time equity and somebody came to sell us the concept of capitalism.
So we're making the assumption that it's not, that we can't function without a financial system because we haven't for the past, thousands of years. Now let me ask you, the financial system that we have right now, does it work for the few or the many?
Well, I'll just say it like this. I think that that the financial system is based on the many failing within it and not being clear on how to make money and not being clear on how money can be utilized. So I think that they have those bankers, I think they guard their secrets, and they've had 500, 1,000 years to write the books on how to continue to evolve those systems so the system doesn't technically fall apart. But I think we're getting to the point where we have enough middle-class educated people who are out there today really starting to question. And for example, when I'm helping my clients understand the monetary system and how it works, and when I share that example with them about how the bankers make money, most people are quite surprised at the straight up front profitability at the bank, right out the door.
Yeah, I mean, you see this even now. We live in a society that is capitalism, but capital, if you look at it today, is worth less and less. So it is basically kind of a paradox in itself. If you look at this today, if you have a savings account, you get nothing for it. And even in the last 3 months, it went from there are some banks who went from 1.50% still down to suddenly 0.15 in 3 months. So for you as a consumer, but your credit card rates or your interest rates, that's if you look at the discrepancy on that one, that's a huge thing that I think we need to start talking about, and we're not talking about it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I remember way back when people would make a deposit at their bank on Friday, but if they didn't get it by the 3 o'clock closing time of the bank on Friday,
it wouldn't go in.
You could still make your deposit, but the bank wouldn't pay you any interest until Monday. And in the meantime, they made money on the weekend on your money.
Yes, they do.
It doesn't make a difference if it's only 100 people, but when we have hundreds of millions of people that are getting stuck with this, if you will, monetary reality, then I'm surprised to say that there's not been more ruckus about it. So I think that a lot of the truths that can come out of a book like mine, where it can very easily educate people and give them a better understanding of finances, at the very least, they'll make better decisions. Yeah. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I hope that we can all conclude that that monetary system really doesn't benefit anybody. And in fact, it creates the biggest roadblocks of society to move ahead. We all hear the term periodically, oh, we can't do that because it's not in the budget. Well, what if your life depended on it? Would you find a way to put it into the budget? So this is just a different way of looking at things. And I think that in my own personal analysis, if people have more energy and more enthusiasm and less worry and less anxiety about money, I think people are going to be a lot happier. Most people, and I can see, and I don't know the American health system, but I know some friends who have traveled to the States, and their hospital bills, due to unfortunate circumstances, were absolutely atrocious. So a lot of people recognize, or they say, wow, Canada's got a great health system. Okay, I agree with that. And yet at the same point in time, why aren't we, if you will, collectively getting together and making all of the institutions work in the same capacity? And that even goes one step further when we're talking about education as an example. Why is it that a doctor from India, as an example, if they come to Canada to work, they can't work immediately in their respective field because their quality or qualifications of doctor is different than ours.
Yeah.
Why can't we have a global system that stabilizes the medical profession and make sure that everybody who's a doctor learns the same thing as everybody else who's a doctor, so that the one certificate collectively can be a representation for all doctors in the system?
Yeah, but I think most people would probably agree with that. I think the question that most of us are asking, or what we're also hearing, is, so what's the alternative? So let's talk about what you're proposing as an alternative. What could it look like? Somebody, most people would say somebody has to pay for all of this, so there's got to be an exchange of value. So let's talk about what could that look like. I'm sure you're just as curious as I am in terms of finding out how this works. Let's talk about it.
Okay, so very simply, let's just assume for a moment that the average person in the world lives to be 75 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just assume for a moment that we break that up into 3 time spans. And the first one would be, of course, birth and initial education, and the I guess ability for a person to select what they wanted to do and then go out and get the required education. And by the time they're 25 years of age, they're actively working in the field that they've chosen to work in.
Mm-hmm.
The next 25 years is to work in that field, is to do the best that we can do in that particular field, regardless of what the work is. We have 25 years and we go out and we work for 25 years. And here's where the time aspect comes in. We all make an agreement. Let's say that we all work or are responsible to work for 35 hours every week. And with that, we get to benefit from everything that everybody else does for that same 35 hours a week. So if I work in a gas station and I pump gas or I do oil changes or maintenance on cars, when I've done my 35 hours of that, then I can go to the grocery store and I can buy my dozen eggs, my bag of bread, a pound of butter. I can stop on the way home and grab a cheeseburger. And at the same time, I can stop off at the liquor store and get a couple of beer or a bottle of wine and go home and turn on my TV set. Oh, it broke. I go and get another TV set. And if we recognize that our time is all equal, then everything that each and every one of us does is equal. And hence, there's no I'm better than you, you're better than me. There's no your time is better than my time. Your time is worth more than mine. How do I know your time is worth more than mine? What did you do? How do you take me as an author and say that my time's worth what? A ditch digger, or am I equivalent to a doctor? If I change the world and I change 7 billion people's mentality, what does that make me? So my thoughts are that when we can remove to a certain degree the ego about the things that we have that are on the outside, then all of a sudden you're not really concentrating on what's outside of yourself, you're concentrating on what's inside of yourself, and that becomes the focus. And again, I'm not talking about an egotistical and inward focus. I'm talking about a reality focus whereby you've chosen the profession that you want to work in. I've talked to so many different people in so many different walks of life, and the most successful people would continue to do what they did, even if they never got paid for it. Yes, they probably have $1 million or $10 million or $100 million in their bank account, but that's not the point. The point is that they would do what they love to do and not have to make money at it.
I think most people will agree with that, but I do have a question going back for a little bit here, because I think there is a difference. Some people work more productively than others. So how would you make up for that? I think most people would agree that everybody would love to do what they do best, right? I don't think there's any one of us that says, who would not want to work in their chosen profession and do what they do best just because they love, the reward is in the love of doing it, right?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, most people, I'm pretty sure that most people will do that. I'm pretty sure you would probably agree with us on this one. Once you know what it is you love to do, you just do it. And most people who are really successful in things always say, do what you love because the money will follow. That's because once you do what you love, this kind of gets you going. But how would we how would we start something like this? So just to take your example, you go to a grocery store, so you work. First of all, what happens if you have a business idea, you want to start a business? How would you start in a world where you have time equity, but no money?
Well, and again, thank you. Those are great questions, and I hope I can answer each and every one. But let's look at it, if you will, if we go through sort of the education process. I don't know how many people watching your show are Star Trek fans, but I grew up on Star Trek, and I thought Gene Roddenberry was amazing. And in the first Star Trek movie, there's two things that really come to light for me in that movie. Number one, Spock as a young man is being educated in this, like a bowl. It looks like a bowl, and it's like floating somewhere. And inside that bowl, he is being educated, excuse me, and educated from the standpoint of, you know, things like NLP. How is he being taught the things that he knows? Are they concentrating on visual, auditory, or kinesthetic input to help him become as good as he can possibly be in any of the professions that will subsequently arise from that education, and truly finding out what it is that you want to do or what you want to be in your life? So some people will be artists, and some people will be mechanically inclined people, and everyone will eventually find their niche, find their place that they're comfortable. And even if you think, as an example, and you go through the education process and you get your certification in any particular area, you would always have the right to exchange, in essence, and go back to school to do something different if you wanted to, and it was feasible. The beauty behind all of that is that there's never a shortage of workers, because any place that needs, let's say, infrastructure people to do a re job of all the sewers in a particular city or something, that we just bring all people in from all over the world if they wanted, and they could come in and help us do a project here in Canada, or do a project in Washington, or do a project in India or Pakistan or Poland or Russia. It really doesn't make any difference, because at the end of the day, all of our efforts are truly the same at that level. We have a job to do, and that job's got to be completed. If we like that kind of work, it's great news. One of the biggest questions that I have in this non-monetary system is, what are all the bankers going to do? Because those are the people who are going to have, at one level, the most to lose. I mean, if we don't have a monetary system, we don't have mortgages and bank accounts and all sorts of financial instruments.
So who keeps track of time? So to my understanding, would we then have like an account where you put in the hours you work in an amount of time, and this is how you exchange it or trade it? Or how do you value something?
Well, okay, so now if you really want to have fun, and I don't have a dictionary beside me, but I can say this. If you go and you look up in the dictionary the word value as an example, it tells you about worth and wealth and money. And they use each other to explain each other. So value is the amount of money or wealth you would have. But wealth would also be the value and the money. So it's continuously feeding in and on itself, which is part of the reason why it's so confusing. At the end of the day, value is only something that you and someone else would determine in the context of, hey, I have a car, it's valued at this, or I have a home or an airplane or something, and it's valued at this. Then that person could turn back and say, well, it's only worth this to me.
So that kind of takes you a little bit to the barter, how barter used to be, where people would trade things and they would barter and say, this is worth to me that, I have this to give you. And would you accept that?
And the answer to that is, why would we do that if we have blockchain as an example that could literally, by wearing a Fitbit or having an RFID chip or something in the context of what you were asking about before, how do you measure a person's time? Well, everybody has a punch clock. They go to work, they work their 35 hours, or they go to school, or the things that they need to do as far as those first 50 years of combined effort. So it's not really rocket science in the sense of once we get past the ego part of it, okay? And the ego part of success, again, is the outward stuff. It's, hey, I drive a Ferrari, or I drive this, and I have a plane, I have a train, I have an ocean liner, I see boats being built for the ultra rich that are beyond your wildest comprehension. And I think it's great at one level, but why should one person, have all of that stuff? And what did they do to get it? Who did they manipulate, or perhaps even corrupt, or maybe steal from, in the sense of getting these material rewards that they want? And I know I'm stepping on toes, but the simple reality is that we're in a stage of our evolution where things are going to change dramatically, whether we like it or not. And, if you want to talk a little further in the sense of, for example, the defense budgets in the United States, and in fact, all around the world, how can anybody justify spending $1.8 trillion, okay, for the purposes of making machinery and things that are going to kill other people?
Yeah, but I think this is a direct development of the heart and the human spirit. This is not necessarily, if we take the monetary system out, then this would be taken care of. I find it really interesting, though, why did you choose time? And what I liked about, what you wrote in your book is, with time, you can create money, but you cannot create time with money. So when you really think about this, time is the one thing none of us can influence, because we're given the time, we're given an amount of time. If you not use it properly, I'm sure there's a lot of people who at the end of their life, they kind of realize, had I only spent my time more meaningful, or more doing the things I really enjoy doing, or being more with people I really loved being with, or something like this. So that to me is definitely something that takes us to a higher dimension already, because the time takes it out of reach of as you said, like what's manipulable, or what can you kind of influence. But I have not fully understood yet how this could work. So what would it take for us, other than, yes, the ego and maybe some greed that's in there, but in your time system, would that mean that no one can have different things? Because people have different tastes. Some people may have a Ferrari because they like the actual design of the car, not necessarily because it's a status symbol.
And I'm the first guy to agree with that, because I'm a car fanatic. I absolutely love classic convertibles. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all of us, and I'd like to just say for a second that, think about it this way. If I read somewhere recently that the world can sustain 20-odd billion people. And that's an amazing, let's just say, potential fact. But the question is how can we, let's say, move people around, okay, when our cities are triple the size and there's more buildings? So we're going to have to start to get smart about, for example, transportation. And I think that individual automobiles, as we can see with Zipcar and other organizations, that you can borrow a car or rent a car by being a member, so that when you need a car, you've got one. And I think that's a large part of things that are going to be coming down the pipeline in the future, is that you won't actually have to buy or own something. And in fact, ironically, our friends at the World Economic Forum have suggested that we own nothing. No cars, no nothing. And everything is, if you will, leased to those individuals. I'm not sure. And again,
who would be the people who would lease it to someone?
Well, if they had all the cars at the dealership, and then you walked in and said, I didn't have a car, but I need it for Tuesday, then you just get to take that car and go drive it. So it's no real difference, except for in the monetary system, you're paying for that. But yes, there's going to be huge transitions, Nicolette. I've thought about a lot of these, and a lot of people have said to me, well, listen, if I run a company and I employ 100,000 people around the world, Why do I have to kind of be a part of that system that everybody else is? I'm not like that because of the way that, for example, I run my business. We could use Richard Branson as a potential example here. He's got all sorts of employees all over the place. And at the end of the day, let's put it this way, his salary would probably pay all of his employees at one level from the standpoint of his personal net worth. And yet, at the same time, it's always you and I that end up paying for it. So I'll go back to a sustainability thing because a large part of your show is about sustainability. And we talk about, as an example, corporations being responsible for themselves. So I look at BP a number of years ago when they had that oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. And it took a tremendous amount of time and effort and everything else to plug that leak up. Whether it's been plugged up properly or not, I don't know. But the simple analogy is this. BP was fined $1 billion, okay, for the mess that they created in the Gulf. Well, during that same time frame, the price for crude oil increased dramatically. And I'm not going to tell you the numbers. If you want to know about them, you go find them. Mm-hmm. But here we are in a world whereby we think BP paid $1 billion to clean up their mess, and it was you and I at the gas pumps with the increase in gas.
Who paid for it?
Okay, that paid for that. So how do we get off on calling that, you know, something that would be considered a sustainable consideration? I think every company, no matter who they are, needs to have not only design and build and research, but they also need to have it in on the back door too. So when you're finished with your car or your cell phone or whatever else, that it goes back to the manufacturer and they take it apart and they're experts at taking their cars apart. And then they can do all those things in the sense of recycling those materials most efficiently and recreating them in other vehicles. So there's never pardon the expression, there's never a place for somebody not to be responsible in our corporate world.
Have you thought about how a system like this, what would it take to actually launch a system like this?
Oh, that's easy. We need 239 million people around the world that would gather and support the time party, if you will, okay? And if we had enough, I think somebody said it was 3.5% of the population will make absolutely incredible changes. So if I take my simple math and I say somewhere around 300 million people that would strongly support the context of a time party, it will be the grounds for the introduction of something new for everybody.
Well, have you heard that? So Richard is looking for 300 million people.
300 million.
Million, that's right, 300 million people to support this. So if you're interested, I guess first you'd have to read up on this in the book, and you can get this on Amazon, that's for sure. But in this last, how do you think we would navigate the repercussions that would have?
Well,
because there would be a lot of people there. There would be some, although I guess the world we're going in, the biggest repercussions would be probably for the 1%. The rest of that's kind of like we're all in the same, swimming in the same pond.
And I take at heart your question very seriously because, yes, that also basically is one of the, I mean, think about it. If we have one group or one family or one individual, whatever the case is, and not to smear anybody, but we can use the initials of BG, who happens to be a person who absolutely adores pharmaceuticals. And how is it that he gets to exercise power over people when nobody has officially given him the power to be able to do that? So is that a problem of the monetary system or is that a problem of democracy? Mm-hmm. And if it's a problem with democracy or if it's a problem with the monetary system, then right there we can start asking questions about, well, how do we stop this from happening again?
Yeah, ideally, that's a very valid question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, think about all the people, we talk about the repercussions going back to, the turn of the century, the last century, when they had that flu. And a lot of people believed that the flu was actually supported, like bolstered by the fact that at the same time, radio waves became a significant consideration in our world from a communication and entertainment perspective. So now we're hearing, with COVID, we're also hearing about 5G and all the implications of what potentially 5G can do. So it's like these people aren't really giving us the truth about things, and we have to be able to deal with the truth.
And I think this is a great ending. We're almost out of time. I do want to show the book again here. This is the book, The Capitalist's Worst Nightmare Come True. You can get it on Amazon. If you're interested, you can certainly read up on this. And I'm sure Richard would be more than open to answer all sorts of questions about this. And you can also read up on this. The book takes you through a lot of the details which we didn't get around to talk about. So thank you so much, Richard. And we are getting very close to the end. We're getting closely to the end of this Smart Sustainability episode, the last one of 2020. And I want to use this moment to express my heartfelt gratitude and deep thank you for your viewership, your company, your support, your blessings, your engagement, and your love. Thank you from all of our crew, and I'd like to say a big thank you also to our crew members as well. You can't see them on the screen, but they're all here. Happy, Ben, Raphael, Brian, Tom, Ross, Bruce, Connie, Lowry, Sean, Pete, and so many others that make this program possible. For me personally, 2020 was quite a pivotal year, and I cannot thank you enough. You all helped me do what I love, which is bringing inspiring topics that affect all of us to you. Give the floor to everyday heroes, creative change makers, innovative leaders, and divinely gifted humans, as all of you are. So let me bow to you for your greatness, your courage, your dignity and light, and the talents that are in each of you. I also bow to all of you who have experienced and shared their pain, hopes, fears, and dreams on our shows, all who helped others and stood up for what they believe. And I'm deeply grateful that you opened up to us, to me, on the show, on the program, because opening up to each other, respecting where each of us stands, is what gets us closer and builds the ship we all travel on. So when we do see each other in pain, we also see each other in our light. And we've seen lots of lights here in the show. Thank you so much. You have a wonderful and blessed 2021. We won't have an episode next week, but we'll be back on January 10th. So have a wonderful 2021, and we'll see you on January 10th. Have a good night. Thank you so much, Richard. I wish you much success with your book.
Thank you. I'm so grateful and truly enjoyed being on air with you. It flew by in what felt like 15 minutes. I'm quite surprised that it's over.